Part 2, Chapter 7 of Jezebel's Daughter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Estenson. Jezebel's Daughter by Wilkie Collins. Part 2, Chapter 7. On further inquiry, it turned out that the gentleman from Munich had no time to spare. In the absence of Mr. Keller, he had asked if he could see one of the other partners. This seemed to imply that commercial interests were in some way connected with the stranger's visit, in which case Mrs. Wagner was perfectly competent to hear what he had to say. "Where is the gentleman?" she asked. "In the drawing-room," Joseph answered. Mrs. Wagner at once left the office. She found herself in the presence of a dignified elderly gentleman, dressed entirely in black, and having the ribbon of some order of merit attached to the buttonhole of his long frock coat. His eyes opened wide in surprise behind his gold spectacles when he found himself face to face with a lady. "I fear there is some mistake," he said, in the smoothest of voices and with the politest of bows. "I asked to see one of the partners." Mrs. Wagner added, largely to his amusement, by informing him of the position that she held in the firm. "If you come on a matter of business," she proceeded, "you may trust me to understand you, sir, though I am only a woman. If your visit relates to private affairs, I beg to suggest that you should write to Mr. Keller, and I will take care that he receives your letter the moment he returns." "There is not the least necessity for my troubling you," the stranger replied. "I am a physician, and I have been summoned to Frankfurt to consult with my colleagues here on a serious case of illness. Mr. Keller's sister is one of my patients in Munich. I thought I would take the present opportunity of speaking to him about the state of her health." He had just introduced himself in those words when Mr. Keller entered the room. The merchant and the physician shook hands like old friends. "No alarming news of my sister, I hope?" said Mr. Keller. "Only the old trouble, my good friend, another attack of asthma." Mrs. Wagner rose to leave the room. Mr. Keller stopped her. "There's not the least necessity for you to leave us," he said, "unless my presentiments deceive me. We may even have occasion to ask your advice. Is there any hope, doctor, of her being well enough to leave Munich towards the end of the month?" "I am sorry to say it," answered the physician, "having heard of the interesting occasion on which she had engaged to be one of your guests. But, at her age, I must ask for a little more time." "In other words, it is impossible for my sister to be with us on the day of my son's marriage?" "Quite impossible. She has so few pleasures, poor soul, and she is so bitterly disappointed, that I volunteered to take advantage of my professional errand here to make a very bold request. Let me first do your excellent sister justice. She will not hear of the young people being disappointed by any postponement of the wedding on her account, and here is the famous necklace committed to my care to prove that she is sincere." He took his little travel bag from the chair on which he had placed it, and produced the case containing the necklace. No woman, not even a head partner in a great house of business, could have looked at those pearls and preserved her composure. Mrs. Wagner burst out with a cry of admiration. Mr. Keller passed the necklace over without notice. His sister was the one object of interest to him. "Would she be fit to travel," he asked, "if we put off the marriage for a month?" "She shall be fit to travel, barring accidents," said the physician, "if you can put off the marriage for a fortnight. I start this evening on my return to Munich, and not a day shall pass without my seeing her." Mr. Keller appealed to Mrs. Wagner. "Surely we might make this trifling sacrifice?" he said. "The pleasure of seeing her nephew married is likely to be the last pleasure of my sister's life." "In your place," said Mrs. Wagner, I should not hesitate for an instant to grant the fortnight's delay. But the bride and groom must be consulted, of course." "And the bride's parents," suggested the discreet physician, "if they are still living." "There's only her mother living," said Mr. Keller. "She is too high-minded a person to raise any objection, I am sure." He paused and reflected for a while. "Fritz counts for nothing," he went on. "I think we ought to put the question in the first instance to the bride?" He rang the bell, and then took the necklace out of Mrs. Wagner's hands. "I have a very high opinion of little Minna," he resumed. "We shall see what the child's own kind heart says, undisturbed by the influence of the pearls, and without any prompting on the part of her mother." He closed the jewel case and put it into a cabinet that stood near him. Joseph was sent upstairs with the necessary message. "Don't make any mistake," said his master. "I wish to see Miss Minna alone." The physician took a pinch of snuff while they were waiting. "The test is hardly conclusive," he remarked slyly. "Women are always capable of sacrificing themselves. What will the bridegroom say?" "My good sir," Mr. Keller rejoined, a little impatiently, "I have mentioned already that Fritz counts for nothing." Minna came in. Her color rose when she found herself unexpectedly in the presence of a dignified and decorated stranger. The physician tapped his snuff box with the air of a man who thoroughly understood young women. "Charming indeed," he said confidentially to Mrs. Wagner. "I am young enough at heart, madam, to wish I was Fritz." Mr. Keller advanced to meet Minna and took her hand. "My dear," he said, "what would you think of me if I requested you to put off your marriage for 2 whole weeks, all on account of an old woman?" "I should think you had surely some reason, sir, for asking me to do that," Minna replied; "and I confess I should be curious to know who the old woman was." In the fewest and plainest words, Mr. Keller repeated what the physician had told him. "Take your own time to think of it," he added, "and consult your mother first, if you like." Minna's sweet face looked lovelier than ever, glowing with the heavenly light of true and generous feeling. "Oh, Mr. Keller," she exclaimed, "do you really suppose I am cold hearted enough to want time to think of it? I am sure I may speak for my mother as well as for myself. Fräulein Keller's time shall be our time. Please tell her so, with my duty, or may I be bold enough to say already with my love?" Mr. Keller kissed her forehead with a fervor of feeling that was rare with him. "You are well worthy of my sister's bridal gift," he said, and took the necklace out of the cabinet and gave it to her. For some moments Minna stood looking at the magnificent pearls in a state of speechless enchantment. When she did speak, her first delightful ardor of admiration had cooled under the chilling perception of a want of proper harmony between her pearls and herself. "They are too grand for me," she said sadly. "I ought to be a great lady, with a wardrobe full of magnificent dresses, to wear such pearls as these." She looked at them again with the natural longing of her sex and age. "May I take the necklace upstairs?" she asked with the most charming inconsistency, "and see how it looks when I put them on?" Mr. Keller smiled and waved his hand. "You can do what you like with your own necklace, my dear," he said. "When I have written a line to my sister, perhaps I may follow you and admire my daughter in law in all her grandeur." The physician looked at his watch. "If you can write your letter in 5 minutes," he suggested, "I can take it with me to Munich." Mrs. Wagner and Minna left the room together. "Come and see how it looks," said Minna. "I should so like to have your opinion." "I will follow you directly, my dear. There is something I have forgotten in the office." The events of the day had ended in making Jack drowsy. He was half asleep on the window seat. Mrs. Wagner effectually roused him. "Mr. Keeper of the Keys," she said, "I want my desk opened." Jack was on his legs in an instant. "Hum, mistress, it's jolly to hear you say that. It's like being in London again." The desk was of the spacious commercial sort, with a heavy mahogany lid. Everything inside was in the most perfect order. A row of pigeon-holes at the back had their contents specified by printed tickets, abstracts of correspondence A to Z, terms for commission agency, key of the iron safe, key of the private ledger, and so on. The ledger, a stout volume with a brass lock, like a private diary, was placed near the pigeon-holes. On the top of it rested a smaller book of the pocket size, entitled Private Accounts. Mrs. Wagner laid both books open before her, at the pages containing the most recent entries, and compared them. "I felt sure I had forgotten it," she said to herself, and transferred an entry in the ledger to the private account book. After replacing the ledger, she locked the desk and returned the key to Jack. "Remember," she said, "the rule in London is the rule here. My desk is never to be opened except when I ask you to do it, and if you allow the key to pass out of your possession, you cease to be the keeper." "Did I ever do either of those two things in London?" Jack asked. "Never." "Then don't be afraid of my doing them here. I say, you haven't put back the little book." He produced the key again and put it into the lock, while Mrs. Wagner was occupied in placing her account book in her pocket. "Its proper place is not in the desk," she explained. "I usually keep it about me." Jack's ready suspicion was excited. "Ah!" he cried, with an outburst of indignation, "you won't trust it to me?" "Take care I don't set a bad conduct mark against you," said Mrs. Wagner. "You foolish fellow, the little book is a copy of what is in the big book, and I trust you with the big book." She knew Jack thoroughly well. His irritable dignity was at once appeased when he heard that the biggest of the duplicate books was in his keeping. He took the key out of the lock again. At the same moment Mr. Keller entered the office. Jack possessed the dog's enviable faculty of distinguishing correctly between the people who are, and the people who are not, their true friends. Mr. Keller privately disliked the idea of having a person about him who had come out of a madhouse. Jack's instincts warned him to leave a room when Mr. Keller entered it. He left the office now. "Is it possible that you trust that crazy creature with the key of your desk?" said Mr. Keller. "Even your bitterest enemy, Mrs. Wagner, would not believe you could be guilty of such an act of rashness." "Pardon me, sir. It is you who are guilty of an act of rashness in forming your judgment. Fancy a woman in her senses trusting her keys to a man who was once in Bedlam. Everybody said that of me when I put Jack to the proof in my own house." "Ah, there are other people then who agree with me," said Mr. Keller. "There are other people, sir, I say it with all needful respect, who know no more of the subject than you do. The most certain curative influence that can be exercised over the poor martyrs of the madhouse is to appeal to their self-respect. From first to last, Jack has never been unworthy of the trust that I have placed in him. Do you think my friends owned they had been mistaken? No more than you will own it. Make your mind easy. I will be personally answerable for anything that is lost, while I am rash enough to trust my crazy creature with my key." Mr. Keller's opinion was not in the least shaken. He merely checked any further expression of it, in deference to the angry lady. "I dare say you know best," he remarked politely. "Let me mention the little matter that has brought me here. David Glenney is, no doubt, closely occupied in London. He ought to know at once that the wedding day is deferred. Will you write to him, or shall I?" Mrs. Wagner began to recover her temper. "I will write with pleasure, Mr. Keller. We have half an hour yet before post time. I have promised Minna to see how the wonderful necklace looks on her. Will you excuse me for a few minutes? Or will you go upstairs with me? I think you said something about it in the drawing room." "Certainly," said Mr. Keller, "if the ladies will let me in." They ascended the stairs together. On the landing outside the drawing room they encountered Fritz and Minna, one out of temper, and the other in tears. "What's wrong now?" Mr. Keller asked sharply. "Fritz, what does that sulky face mean?" "I consider myself very badly used," Fritz answered. "I say there's a great want of proper consideration for me in putting off our marriage, and Madame Fontaine agrees with me." "Madame Fontaine?" He looked at Minna as he repeated the name. "Is this really true?" Minna trembled at the bare recollection of what had passed. "Oh, don't ask me," she pleaded piteously. "I can't tell what has come to my mother. She is so changed she frightens me. And as for Fritz," she said, rousing herself, "if he is to be a selfish tyrant, I can tell him this: I won't marry him at all." Mr. Keller turned to Fritz and pointed contemptuously down the stairs. "Leave us," he said. Fritz opened his lips to protest. Mr. Keller interposed with a protest of his own. "One of these days," he went on, "you may possibly have a son. You will not find his society agreeable to you, when he happens to have made a fool of himself." He pointed down the stairs for the second time. Fritz retired, frowning portentously. His father addressed Minna with marked gentleness of manner. "Rest and recover yourself, my child. I will see your mother, and set things right. Don't go away by yourself, my dear," Mrs. Wagner added kindly. "Come with me to my room." Mr. Keller entered the drawing room, and sent Joseph with another message. "Go up to Madame Fontaine, and say I wish to see her here immediately." End of Chapter 7, Part 2. Recording by Sandra Estenson. Chapter 8 of Jezebel's Daughter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Estenson. Jezebel's Daughter by Wilkie Collins. Part 2, Chapter 8. The widow presented herself with a dogged resignation singularly unlike her customary manner. Her eyes had a set look of hardness. Her lips were fast closed. Her usually colorless complexion had faded to a strange grayish pallor. If her dead husband could have risen from the grave and warned Mr. Keller, he would have said, "Once or twice in my life I have seen her like that. Mind what you are about." She puzzled Mr. Keller. He tried to gain time. He bowed and pointed to a chair. Madame Fontaine took the chair in silence. Her hard eyes looked straight at the master of the house, overhung more heavily than usual by their drooping lids. Her thin lips never opened. The whole expression of the woman said plainly, "You speak first." Mr. Keller spoke. His kindly instinct warned him not to refer to Minna in alluding to the persons from whom he had derived his information. "I heard from my son," he said, "that you do not approve of our putting off the wedding day, though it is only for a fortnight. Are you aware of the circumstances?" "I am aware of the circumstances." "Your daughter informed you of my sister's illness, I suppose?" At that first reference to Minna, some inner agitation faintly stirred the still surface of Madame Fontaine's face. "Yes," she said, "my thoughtless daughter informed me." The epithet applied to Minna, aggravated by the deliberate emphasis laid on it, jarred Mr. Keller's sense of justice. "It appears to me," he said, "that your daughter acted in this manner not only with the truest kindness, but with the utmost good sense. Mrs. Wagner and my sister's physician were both present at the time, and both agreed with me in admiring her conduct. What has she done to deserve that you should call her thoughtless? She ought to have remembered her duty to her mother. She ought to have consulted me before she presumed to decide for herself. In that case, Madame Fontaine, would you have objected to change the day of the marriage?" "I am well aware, sir, that your sister has honored my daughter by making her a magnificent present." Mr. Keller's face began to harden. "May I beg you to be so good as to answer my question plainly?" he said, in tones which were peremptory for the first time. "Would you have objected to grant the fortnight's delay?" She answered him on the bare chance that a strong expression of her opinion as the bride's mother might even now induce him to revert to the date originally chosen for the wedding. "I should certainly have objected," she said firmly. "What difference could it possibly make to you?" There was suspicion in his manner as well as surprise when he put that question. "For what reason would you have objected?" "Is my objection as Minna's mother not worthy of some consideration, sir, without any heedless inquiry into motives?" "Your daughter's objection as the bride would have been a final objection to my mind," Mr. Keller answered. "But your objection is simply unaccountable. And as I press you for your motives, having this good reason for doing so on my side, if I am to disappoint my sister, cruelly to disappoint her, it must be for some better cause than a mere caprice." It was strongly put, and not easily answered. Madame Fontaine made a last effort. She invented the likeliest motives she could think of. "I object, sir, in the first place, to putting off the most important event in my daughter's life, and in my life, as if it were some trifling engagement. Besides, how do I know that some other unlucky circumstance may not cause more delays, and perhaps prevent the marriage from taking place at all?" Mr. Keller rose from his chair. Whatever her true motives might be, it was now perfectly plain that she was concealing them from him. "If you have any more serious reasons to give me than these," he said quietly and coldly, "let me hear them between this and post time to morrow. In the meanwhile, I need not detain you any longer." Madame Fontaine rose also, but she was not quite defeated yet. "As things are, then," she resumed, "I am to understand, sir, that the marriage is put off to the 13th of January next?" "Yes, with your daughter's consent." "Suppose my daughter changes her mind in the interval?" "Under your influence?" "Mr. Keller, you insult me." "I should insult your daughter, Madame Fontaine, after what she said in this room before me and before other witnesses, if I supposed her to be capable of changing her mind, except under your influence." "Good evening, sir." "Good evening, ma'am." She went back to her room. The vacant spaces on the walls were prettily filled up with prints and water-color drawings. Among these last was a little portrait of Mr. Keller in a glazed frame. She approached it, looked at it, and suddenly tearing it from the wall, threw it on the floor. It happened to fall with the glass uppermost. She stamped on it in a perfect frenzy of rage, not only crushing the glass, but even breaking the frame and completely destroying the portrait as a work of art. "There, that has done me good," she said to herself, and kicked the fragments into a corner of the room. She was now able to take a chair at the fireside and shape out for herself the course which was safest to follow. Minna was first in her thoughts. She could bend the girl to her will and send her to Mr. Keller, but he would certainly ask under what influence she was acting, in terms which would place the alternative between a downright falsehood or a truthful answer. Minna was truth itself. In her youngest days she had been one of those rare children who never take their easy refuge in a lie. What influence would be most likely to persuade her to deceive Fritz's father? The widow gave up the idea in the moment when it occurred to her. Once again Jezebel's daughter unconsciously touched Jezebel's heart with the light of her purity and her goodness. The mother shrank from deliberately degrading the nature of her own child. The horrid question of the money followed. On the 31st of the month the promissory note would be presented for payment. Where was the money to be found? Some little time since, having the prospect of Minna's marriage on the 30th of December before her, she had boldly resolved on referring the holder of the note to Mr. Keller. Did it matter to her what the sordid old merchant said or thought after Minna had become his son's wife? She would coolly say to him, "The general body of the creditors harassed me. I preferred having one creditor to deal with, who had no objection to grant me time. His debt has fallen due, and I have no money to pay it. Choose between paying it yourself and the disgrace of letting your son's mother-in-law be publicly arrested in Frankfurt for debt." So she might have spoken if her daughter had been a member of Mr. Keller's family. With floods of tears, with eloquent protestations, with threats even of self-destruction, could she venture on making the confession now? She remembered how solemnly she had assured Mr. Keller that her debts were really and truly paid. She remembered the inhuman scorn with which he had spoken of persons who failed to meet their pecuniary engagements honestly. Even if he forgave her for deceiving him, which was in the last degree improbable, he was the sort of man who would suspect her of other deceptions. He would inquire if she had been quite disinterested in attending at his bedside and saving his life. He might take counsel privately with his only surviving partner, Mrs. Wagner. Mrs. Wagner might recall the interview in the drawing-room and the conversation about Jack, and might see her way to consulting Jack's recollections of his illness at Würzburg. The risk to herself of encountering these dangers was trifling, but the risk to Minna involved nothing less than the breaking off of the marriage. She decided on keeping up appearances at any sacrifice until the marriage released her from the necessities of disguise. So it came back again to the question of how the money was to be found. Had she any reasonable hope of success if she had asked for a few days' leave of absence and went to Würzburg? Would the holder of the bill allow her to renew it for a fortnight? She got up and consulted her glass, and turned away from it again with a sigh. "If I was only 10 years younger," she thought. The letter which she received from Würzburg had informed her that the present holder of the bill was a middle-aged man. If he had been very young or very old, she would have trusted in the autumn of her beauty, backed by her ready wit. But experience had taught her that the fascinations of a middle-aged woman are, in the vast majority of cases, fascinations thrown away on middle-aged men. Even if she could hope to be one of the exceptions that proved the rule, the middle-aged man was an especially inaccessible person in this case. He had lost money by her already, money either paid or owing to the spy whom he'd set to watch her. Was this the sort of man who would postpone the payment of his just dues? She opened the drawers in the toilet table and took out the pearl necklace. "I thought it would come to this," she said quietly. "Instead of paying the promissory note, Mr. Keller will have to take the necklace out of pledge." The early evening darkness of winter had set in. She dressed herself for going out, and left her room, with the necklace in its case concealed under her shawl. Poor puzzled Minna was waiting timidly to speak to her in the corridor. "Oh, mamma, do forgive me. I meant it for the best." The widow put one arm (the other was not at liberty) round her daughter's waist. "You foolish child," she said, "will you never understand that your poor mother is getting old and irritable? I may think you have made a great mistake in sacrificing yourself to the infirmities of an asthmatic stranger at Munich, but as to being ever really angry with you, kiss me, my love. I never was fonder of you than I am now. Lift my veil. Oh, my darling, I don't like giving you to anybody, even to Fritz." Minna changed the subject, a sure sign that she and Fritz were friends again. "How thick and heavy your veil is," she said. "It is cold out of doors, my child, to night." "But why are you going out?" "I don't feel very well, Minna. A brisk walk in the frosty air will do me good. Mamma, do let me go with you." "No, my dear, you are not a hard old woman like me, and you shall not run the risk of catching cold. Go into my room and keep the fire up. I shall be back in half an hour. Where is my necklace, mamma?" "My dear, the bride's mother keeps the bride's necklace, and when we do try it on, we will see how it looks by daylight." In a minute more Madame Fontaine was out in the street, on her way to the nearest jeweler. End of Chapter 8, Part 2. Recording by Sandra Estenson. To Chapter 9 of Jezebel's Daughter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Estenson. Jezebel's Daughter by Wilkie Collins. Part 2, Chapter 9. The widow stopped at a jeweler's window in the famous street called the Zeil. The only person in the shop was a simple-looking old man, sitting behind the counter reading a newspaper. She went in. "I have something to show you, sir," she said in her softest and sweetest tones. The simple old man first looked at her thick veil, and then at the necklace. He lifted his hands in amazement and admiration. "May I examine these glorious pearls?" he asked, and looked at them through a magnifying glass, and weighed them in his hand. "I wonder you are not afraid to walk out alone in the dark with such a necklace as this," he said. "May I send to my foreman and let him see it?" Madame Fontaine granted his request. He rang the bell which communicated with the proper workrooms. Being now satisfied that she was speaking to the proprietor of the shop, she risked her first inquiry. "Have you any necklace of imitation pearls which resembles my necklace?" she asked. The old gentleman started and looked harder than ever at the impenetrable veil. "Good heavens, no!" he exclaimed. "There's no such thing in all Frankfurt." "Could an imitation be made, sir?" The foreman entered the shop, a sullen, self-concentrated man. "Fit for a queen," he remarked, with calm appreciation of the splendid pearls. His master repeated to him Madame Fontaine's last question. "They might do it in Paris," he answered briefly. What time could you give them, madam?" "I should want the imitation set here before the 13th of next month." The master, humanely pitying the lady's ignorance, smiled and said nothing. The foreman's decision was rough and ready. Nothing like time enough. Quite out of the question. Madame Fontaine had no choice but to resign herself to circumstances. She had entered the shop with the idea of exhibiting the false necklace on the wedding day, whilst the genuine pearls were pledged for the money of which she stood in need. With the necklace in pawn, and with no substitute to present in its place, what would Minna say? What would Mr. Keller think? It was useless to pursue those questions. Some plausible excuse must be found. No matter what suspicions might be excited, the marriage would still take place. The necklace was no essential part of the ceremony which made Fritz and Minna man and wife, and the money must be had. "I suppose, sir, you grant loans on valuable security such as this necklace?" she said. "Certainly, madam." "Provided you have the lady's name and address," the disagreeable foreman suggested, turning to his master. The old man cordially agreed. "Quite true, and a reference besides, some substantial person, madam, well known in this city. The responsibility is serious with such pearls as these." "Is the reference absolutely necessary?" Madame Fontaine asked. The foreman privately touched his master behind the counter. Understanding the signal, the simple old gentleman closed the jewel case and handed it back. "Absolutely necessary," he answered. Madame Fontaine went out again into the street. A substantial reference meant a person of some wealth and position in Frankfurt, a person like Mr. Keller, for example. Where was she to find such a reference? Her relatives in the city had deliberately turned their backs on her. Out of Mr. Keller's house they were literally the only substantial people whom she knew. The one chance left seemed to be to try a pawnbroker. At this second attempt she was encountered by a smart young man. The moment he saw the necklace, he uttered a devout ejaculation of surprise and blew a whistle. The pawnbroker himself appeared, looked at the pearls, looked at the veiled lady, and answered as the jeweler had answered, but less civilly. "I'm not going to get myself into a scrape," said the pawnbroker. "I must have a good reference." Madame Fontaine was not a woman easily discouraged. She turned her steps towards the noble medieval street called the Judengasse, then thickly inhabited, now a spectacle of decrepit architectural old age, to be soon succeeded by a new street. By twos and threes at a time, the Jews in this quaint quarter of the town clamorously offered their services to the lady who had come among them. When the individual Israelite to whom she applied saw the pearls, he appeared to take leave of his senses. He screamed, he clapped his hands, he called upon his wife, his children, his sisters, his lodgers, to come and feast their eyes on such a necklace as had never been seen since Solomon received the Queen of Sheba. The first excitement having worn itself out, a perfect volley of questions followed. What was the lady's name? Where did she live? How had she got the necklace? Had it been given to her? And if so, who had given it? Where had it been made? Why had she brought it to the Judengasse? Did she want to sell it, or to borrow money on it? Aha, to borrow money on it. Very good indeed. But and then the detestable invitation to produce the reference made itself heard once more. Madame Fontaine's answer was well conceived. "I will pay you good interest in place of a reference," she said. Upon this, the Jewish excitability, vibrating between the desire of gain and the terror of consequences, assumed a new form. Some of them groaned. Some of them twisted their fingers frantically in their hair. Some of them called on the deity worshipped by their fathers to bear witness on how they had suffered, by dispensing with references in other cases of precious deposits. one supremely aged and dirty Jew actually suggested placing an embargo on the lady and her necklace, and sending information to the city authorities at the town hall. In the case of a timid woman, this sage's advice might actually have been followed. Madame Fontaine preserved her presence of mind, and left the Judengasse as freely as she had entered it. "I can borrow the money elsewhere," she said haughtily at parting. "Yes," cried a chorus of voices answering, "you can borrow of a receiver of stolen goods." It was only too true. The extraordinary value of the pearls demanded on that account extraordinary precautions on the part of the money lenders of every degree. Madame Fontaine put back the necklace in the drawer of her toilet table. The very splendor of Minna's bridal gift made it useless as a means of privately raising money among strangers. And yet the money must be found at any risk, under any circumstances, no matter how degrading or how dangerous they might be. With that desperate resolution she went to her bed. Hour after hour she heard the clock strike. The faint cold light of the new day found her still waking and thinking, and still unprepared with a safe plan for meeting the demand on her, when the note came due. As to the resources of her own, the value of the few jewels and dresses that she possessed did not represent half the amount of her debt. It was a busy day at the office. The work went on until far into the evening. Even when the household assembled at the supper table, there was an interruption. A messenger called with a pressing letter which made it immediately necessary to refer to the past correspondence of the firm. Mr. Keller rose from the table. "The abstracts will rake up less time to examine," he said to Mrs. Wagner. "You have them in your desk, I think?" She at once turned to Jack, and ordered him to produce the key. He took it from his bag, under the watchful eyes of Madame Fontaine, observing him from the opposite side of the table. "I should have preferred opening the desk myself," Jack remarked, when Mr. Keller had left the room, "but I suppose I must give way to the master. Besides, he hates me." The widow was quite startled by this strong assertion. "How can you say so?" she exclaimed. "We all like you, Jack. Come and have a little wine out of my glass." Jack refused this proposal. "I don't want wine," he said. "I am sleepy and cold, and I want to go to bed." Madame Fontaine was too hospitably inclined to take no for an answer. "Only a little drop," she pleaded. "You look so cold." "Surely you forget what I told you," Mrs. Wagner interposed. "Wine first excites and then stupefies him. The last time I tried it, he was as dull and heavy as if I had given him laudanum. I thought I mentioned it to you." She turned to Jack. "You look sadly tired, my poor little man. Go to bed at once." "Without the key?" cried Jack indignantly. "I hope I know my duty better than that." Mr. Keller returned, perfectly satisfied with the result of his investigation. "I knew it," he said. "The mistake is on the side of our clients. I have sent them the proof of it." He handed back the key to Mrs. Wagner. She at once transferred it to Jack. Mr. Keller shook his head in obstinate disapproval. "Would you run such a risk as that?" he said to Madame Fontaine, speaking in French. "I should be afraid," she replied in the same language. Jack secured the key in his bag, kissed his mistress's hand, and approached the door on his way to bed. "Won't you wish me good night?" said the amiable widow. "I didn't know whether German or English would do for you," Jack answered, "and I can't speak your unknown tongue." He made one of his fantastic bows and left the room. "Does he understand French?" Madame Fontaine asked. "No," said Mrs. Wagner. "He only understood that you and Mr. Keller had something to conceal from him." In due course of time the little party at the supper table rose and retired to their rooms. The first part of the night passed as tranquilly as usual, but between 1 and 2 in the morning Mrs. Wagner was alarmed by a violent beating against her door, and a shrill screaming in Jack's voice. "Let me in! I want a light! I've lost the keys!" She called out to him to be quiet while she put on her dressing gown and struck a light. They were fortunately on the side of the house occupied by the offices, the other inhabited bedchambers being far enough off to be approached by a different staircase. Still, in the silence of the night, Jack's reiterated cries of terror and beatings at the door might possibly reach the ears of a light sleeper. She pulled him into the room and closed the door again, with an impetuosity that utterly confounded him. "Sit down there and compose yourself," she said sternly. "I won't give you the light until you are perfectly quiet. You disgrace me if you disturb the house." Between cold and terror, Jack shuddered from head to foot. "May I whisper?" he asked, with a look of piteous submission. Mrs. Wagner pointed to the last living embers in the fireplace. She knew by experience the tranquilizing influence of giving him something to do. "Rake the fire together," she said, "and warm yourself first." He obeyed, and then laid himself down in his dog-like way on the rug. A quarter of an hour at least passed before his mistress considered him to be in a fit state to tell his story. There was little or nothing to relate. He had put his bag under his pillow as usual, and, after a long sleep, he had woke with a horrid fear that something had happened to the keys. He had felt in vain for them under the pillow, and all over the bed, and all over the floor. "After that," he said, "the horrors got a hold of me, and I am afraid I went actually mad for a little while. I'm all right now, if you please. See, I'm as quiet as a bird with its head under its wing." Mrs. Wagner took the light and led the way to his little room close by her own bedchamber. She lifted the pillow, and there lay the leather bag, exactly where he had placed it when he went to bed. Jack's face, when this discovery revealed itself, would have pleaded for mercy with a far less generous woman than Mrs. Wagner. She took his hand. "Get into bed again," she said kindly, "and the next time you dream, try not to make a noise about it." "No." Jack refused to get into bed again until he had been heard in his own defense. He dropped on his knees, held up his clasped hands as if he was praying. "When you first taught me to say prayers," he answered, "you said God would hear me, as God hears me now, mistress. I was wide awake when I put my hand under the pillow, and the bag was not there. Do you believe me?" Mrs. Wagner was strongly impressed by the simple fervor of this declaration. It was no mere pretense when she answered that she did believe him. At her suggestion, the bag was unstrapped and examined. Not only the unimportant keys, with another one added to their number, but the smaller key which opened her desk, were found safe inside. "We will talk about it to-morrow," she said. Having wished him good night, she paused in the act of opening the door and looked at the lock. There was no key in it, but there was another protection in the shape of a bolt underneath it. "Did you bolt your door when you went to bed?" she asked. "No." The obvious suspicion suggested by this negative answer crossed her mind. "What has become of the key of your door?" she inquired next. Jack hung his head. "I put it along with the other keys," he confessed, "to make the bag look bigger." Alone in her own room, Mrs. Wagner stood by the reanimated fire, thinking. While Jack was asleep, any person with a soft step and a delicate hand might have approached his bedside when the house was quiet for the night and have taken his bag. And, again, any person within hearing of the alarm that he had raised some hours afterwards might have put the bag back while he was recovering himself in Mrs. Wagner's room. Who could have been near enough to hear the alarm? Somebody in the empty bedrooms above? Or somebody in the solitary offices below? If a theft had really been committed, the one likely object of it would be the key of the desk. This pointed to the probability that the alarm had reached the ears of the thief in the offices. Was there any person in the house, from the honest servants upwards, whom it would be reasonably possible to suspect of theft? Mrs. Wagner returned to her bed. She was not a woman to be daunted by trifles, but on this occasion her courage failed her when she was confronted by her own question. End of Chapter 9, Part 2. Recording by Sandra Estenson. Chapter 10 of Jezebel's Daughter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Estenson. Jezebel's Daughter by Wilkie Collins, Part 2, Chapter 10. The office hours in the winter time began at 9 o'clock. From the head clerk to the messenger, not one of the persons employed slept in the house. It was Mr. Keller's wish they should all be absolutely free to do what they liked with their leisure time in the evening. "I know that I can trust them, from the oldest to the youngest man in my service," he used to say, "and I like to show it." Under these circumstances, Mrs. Wagner had only to rise earlier than usual to be sure of having the whole range of the offices entirely to herself. At 8 o'clock, with Jack in attendance, she was seated at her desk, carefully examining the different objects that it contained. There was nothing missing. Nothing had been moved out of its customary place. No money was kept in the desk, but her valuable watch, which had stopped on the previous day, had been put there to remind her that it must be sent to be cleaned. The watch, like everything else, was found in its place. If some person had really opened her desk in the night, no common thief had been concerned, and no common object had been in view. She took the key of the iron safe from its pigeonhole and opened the door. Her knowledge of the contents of this repository was far from being accurate. The partners each possessed a key, but Mr. Keller had many more occasions than Mrs. Wagner for visiting the safe, and to make a trustworthy examination more difficult still, the mist of the early morning was fast turning into a dense white fog. Of one thing, however, Mrs. Wagner was well aware. A certain sum of money in notes and securities was always kept in this safe as a reserve fund. She took the tin box in which the paper money was placed close to the light and counted its contents. Then, replacing it in the safe, she opened the private ledger next to compare the result of her counting with the entry relating to the fund. Being unwilling to cause surprise, perhaps to excite suspicion by calling for a candle before the office hours had begun, she carried the ledger also to the window. There was just light enough to see the sum total in figures. To her infinite relief, It exactly corresponded with the result of her counting. She secured everything again in its proper place, and, after finally locking the desk, handed the key to Jack. He shook his head and refused to take it. More extraordinary still, he placed his bag with all the other keys in it on the desk, and said, "Please keep it for me. I'm afraid to keep it myself." Mrs. Wagner looked at him with a first feeling of alarm, which changed instantly to compassion. The tears were in his eyes. His sensitive vanity was cruelly wounded. "My poor boy," she said gently, "what is it that troubles you?" The tears rolled down Jack's face. "I'm a wretched creature," he said. "I'm not fit to keep the keys, after letting a thief steal them last night. Take them back, mistress. I'm quite broken-hearted. Please try me again in London." "A thief?" Mrs. Wagner repeated. "Haven't you seen me examine everything? And mind, if there had been any dishonest person about the house last night, the key of my desk is the only key that a thief would have thought worth stealing. I happen to be sure of that. Come, come, don't be downhearted. You know I never deceive you, and I say you are quite wrong in suspecting that your bag was stolen last night." Jack solemnly lifted his hand, as his custom was in the great emergencies in his life. "And I say," he reiterated, "there's a thief in the house, and you will find it out before long. When we are back in London again, I will be keeper of the keys. Never, never, never more here." It was useless to contend with him. The wise course was to wait until his humor changed. Mrs. Wagner locked up his bag and put the key of the desk back in her pocket. She was not very willing to own it even to herself. Jack's intense earnestness had a little shaken her. After breakfast that morning, Minna lingered at the table instead of following her mother upstairs as usual. When Mr. Keller also had left the room, she addressed a little request of her own to Mrs. Wagner. "I have got a difficult letter to write," she said, "and Fritz thought you might be kind enough to help me." "With greatest pleasure, my dear. Does your mother know of this letter?" "Yes. It was mamma who said I ought to write it. But she is going out this morning, and when I asked her for a word of advice, she shook her head. 'They will think it comes from me,' she said, 'and the whole effect of it will be spoilt.' It's a letter, Mrs. Wagner, announcing my marriage to mamma's relations here, who have behaved so badly to her, and she says they may do something for me if I write to them as if I had done it all out of my own head. I don't know whether I make myself understood." "Perfectly, Minna. Come to my writing room, and we will see what we can do together." Mrs. Wagner led the way out. As she opened the door, Madame Fontaine passed her in the hall, in walking costume, with a small paper packet in her hand. "There is a pen, Minna. Sit down by me, and write what I tell you." The ink bottle had been replenished by the person charged with that duty, and he had filled it a little too full. In a hurry to write the first words dictated, Minna dipped her pen too deeply in the bottle. On withdrawing it, she not only blotted the paper, but scattered some of the superfluous ink over the sleeve of Mrs. Wagner's dress. "Oh, how awkward I am!" she exclaimed. "Excuse me for a minute. Mamma has got something in her dressing case which will take out the marks directly." She ran upstairs and returned with the powder which her mother had used in erasing the first sentence on the label attached to the blue glass bottle. Mrs. Wagner looked at the printed instructions on the little paper box. When the stains had been removed from her dress, with some curiosity, "Macula extinctor," she read, "or destroyer of stains. Partially dissolve the powder in a teaspoonful of water. Rub it well over the place, and the stain will disappear without taking out the color of the dress. This extraordinary specific may also be used for erasing written characters without any way injuring the paper, otherwise than by leaving a slight shine on the surface. "Is this to be got in Frankfurt?" asked Mrs. Wagner. "I only know of lemon juice as a remedy against ink marks, when I get them on my dress or my fingers." "Keep it, dear Mrs. Wagner. I can easily buy another box for mamma where we got this one, at a chemist's in the Zeil. See how easily I can take off the blot that I dropped on the paper. Unless you look very close you can hardly see the shine, and the ink has completely disappeared." "Thank you, my dear, but your mother might meet with some little accident, and might want your wonderful powder when I am out of the way. Take it back when we have done our letter, and we will go to the chemist together and buy another box in a day or two." On the 13th of December, after dinner, Mr. Keller proposed a toast: "Success to the adjourned wedding day." There was a general effort to be cheerful, which was not rewarded by success. Nobody knew why, but the fact remained that nobody was really merry. On the 31st there was more hard work at the office. The last day of the old year was the day on which the balance was struck. Towards noon Mr. Keller appeared in Mrs. Wagner's office and opened the safe. "We must see about the reserve fund," he said. "I will count the money if you will open the ledger and see that the entry is right. I don't know what you think, but my idea is that we keep too much money lying idle in these prosperous times. What do you say to using half of the customary fund for investment? By the way, our day for dividing the profits is not your day in London. When my father founded this business, the 6th of January was the chosen date, being one way, among others, of celebrating his birthday. We have kept to the old custom out of regard for his memory, and your worthy husband entirely approved of our conduct. I am sure you agree with him?" "With all my heart," said Mrs. Wagner. "Whatever my good husband thought, I think." Mr. Keller proceeded to count the fund. 15,000 florins, he announced. "I thought it had been more than that. If poor dear Engelmann had been here Never mind. What does the ledger say?" 15,000 florins, Mrs. Wagner answered. "Ah, very well. My memory must have deceived me. This used to be Engelmann's business, and you are as careful as he was. I can say no more." Mr. Keller replaced the money in the safe and hastened back to his own office. Mrs. Wagner raised one side of the ledger off the desk to close the book, stopped to think, and laid it back again. The extraordinary accuracy of Mr. Keller's memory was proverbial in the office. Remembering the compliment which he had paid to her sense of responsibility as Mr. Engelmann's successor, Mrs. Wagner was not quite satisfied to take it for granted that he had made a mistake, even on the plain evidence of the ledger. A reference to the duplicate entry in her private account book would at once remove even the shadow of a doubt. The last day of the old year was bright and frosty. The clear midday light fell on the open page before her. She looked again at the entry, thus recorded in figures, 15,000 florins, and observed a trifling circumstance which had previously escaped her. The strokes which represented the figures 15 were unquestionably a very little, thicker than the strokes which represented the 3 zeros or naughts that followed. Had a hair gotten on to the pen of the head clerk who had made the entry? Or was there some trifling defect in the paper at that particular part of the page? She once more raised one side of the ledger so that the light fell at an angle on the writing. There was a difference between that part of the paper on which the figures 15 were written and the rest of the page, and the difference consisted in a slight shine on the surface. The side of the ledger dropped from her hand on the desk. She left the office and ran upstairs to her own room. Her private account book had not been wanted lately, and it was locked up in her dressing case. She took it out and referred to it. There was the entry as she had copied it, and compared it with the ledger. 20,000 florins. Madame Fontaine, she said to herself in a whisper. End of chapter 10, part 2. Recording by Sandra Estenson. Part 2, Chapter 11 of Jezebel's Daughter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Estenson. Jezebel's Daughter by Wilkie Collins. Part 2, Chapter 11. The new year had come. On the morning of the 2nd of January, Mrs. Wagner, on her way to the office at the customary hour, was stopped at the lower flight of stairs by Madame Fontaine, evidently waiting with a purpose. "Pardon me," said the widow, "I must speak to you." "These are business hours, madam. I have no time to spare." Without paying the slightest heed to this reply, impenetrable, in the petrifying despair that possessed her, to all that looks, tones, and words could say, Madame Fontaine stood her ground and obstinately repeated, "I must speak to you." Mrs. Wagner once more refused. "All that needs to be said between us has been said," she answered. "Have you replaced the money?" "That is what I want to speak about." "Have you replaced the money?" "Don't drive me mad, Mrs. Wagner. As you hope for mercy yourself at the hour of your death, show mercy to the miserable woman who implores you to listen to her. Return with me as far as the drawing room. This time of day nobody will disturb us there. Give me 5 minutes." Mrs. Wagner looked at her watch. "I will give you 5 minutes. And mind, I mean 5 minutes. Even in trifles I speak the truth." They returned up the stairs, Mrs. Wagner leading the way. There were 2 doors of entrance to the drawing room, one which opened from the landing, and a smaller door situated at the farther end of the corridor. This second entrance communicated with a sort of alcove in which a piano was placed, and which was separated by curtains from the spacious room beyond. Mrs. Wagner entered by the main door, and paused, standing near the fireplace. Madame Fontaine followed her, turning aside to the curtains, and looked through. Having assured herself that no person was in the recess, she approached the fireplace, and said her first words. "You told me just now, madam, that you spoke the truth. Does that imply a doubt of the voluntary confession?" "You made no voluntary confession," Mrs. Wagner interposed. "I had positive proof of the theft that you have committed when I entered your room. I showed you my private account book, and when you attempted to defend yourself, I pointed to the means of falsifying the figures in the ledger which lay before me in your own dressing case. What do you mean by talking of a voluntary confession after that?" "You mistake me, ma'am. I was speaking of the confession of my motives, the motives which, in my dreadful position, forced me to take the money, or to sacrifice the future of my daughter's life. I declare that I have concealed nothing from you. As you are a Christian woman, don't be hard on me." Mrs. Wagner drew back and eyed her with an expression of contemptuous surprise. "Hard on you?" she repeated. "Do you know what you are saying? Have you forgotten already how I have consented to degrade myself? Must I once more remind you of my position? I am bound to tell Mr. Keller that his money and mine has been stolen. I am bound to tell him that he has taken into his house, and has respected and trusted, a thief. There is my plain duty, and I have consented to trifle with it. Are you lost to all sense of decency? Have you no idea of the shame that an honest woman must feel when she knows that her unworthy silence makes her, for the time at least, the accomplice of your crime? Do you think it was for your sake, not to be hard on you, that I have consented to this intolerable sacrifice? In the instant when I discovered you, I would have sent for Mr. Keller, but for the sweet girl whose misfortune it is to be your child. Once for all, have you anything to say which it is absolutely necessary that I should hear? Have you, or have you not, complied with the conditions on which I consented, God help me, to be what I am?" Her voice faltered. She turned away proudly to compose herself. The look that flashed out at her from the widow's eyes, the suppressed fury struggling to force its way in words through the widow's lips, escaped her notice. It was the first and last warning of what was to come, and she missed it. "I wish to speak to you of your conditions," Madame Fontaine resumed after a pause. "Your conditions are impossibilities. I entreat you, in Minna's interest, oh, not in mine, to modify them." The tone in which those words fell from her lips was so unnaturally quiet that Mrs. Wagner suddenly turned again with a start, and faced her. "What do you mean by impossibilities? Explain yourself." "You are an honest woman, and I am a thief," Madame Fontaine answered with the same ominous composure. "How can explanations pass between you and me? Have I not spoken plainly enough already? In my position, I say again, your conditions are impossibilities, especially the first of them." There was something in the bitterly ironical manner which accompanied this reply that was almost insolent. Mrs. Wagner's color began to rise for the first time. "Honest conditions are always possible conditions to honest people," she said. Perfectly unmoved by the reproof implied in those words, Madame Fontaine persisted in presenting her request. "I only ask you to modify your terms," she explained. "Let us understand each other. Do you still insist on my replacing what I have taken by the morning of the 6th of this month?" "I still insist." "Do you still expect me to resign my position here as director of the household on the day when Fritz and Minna have become man and wife?" "I still expect that." "Permit me to set the second condition aside for a while. Suppose I fail to replace the 5,000 florins in your reserve fund. If you fail, I shall do my duty to Mr. Keller when we divide profits on the 6th of the month. And you will expose me in this way, knowing that you make the marriage impossible, knowing that you doom my daughter to shame and misery for the rest of her life. I shall expose you, knowing that I have kept your guilty secret to the last moment, and knowing that I owe to my partner and to myself. You have still 4 days to spare. Make the most of your time." "I can do absolutely nothing in the time." "Have you tried?" The suppressed fury in Madame Fontaine began to get beyond her control. "Do you think I should have exposed myself to the insults that you have heaped on me if I had not tried?" she asked. "Can I get the money back from the man to whom it was paid at Wurzburg, when my note fell due on the last day of the old year? Do I know anybody who will lend me 5,000 florins? Will my father do it? His house has been closed to me for 20 years, and my mother, who might have interceded for me, is dead. Can I appeal to the sympathy and compassion, once already refused in the hardest terms, of my merciless relatives in this city? I have appealed. I have forced my way to them yesterday. I owned that I owed a sum of money which was more, far more than I could pay. I drank the bitter cup of humiliation to the dregs. I even offered my daughter's necklace as security for a loan. Do you want to know what reply I received? The master of the house turned his back on me. The mistress told me to my face that she believed I had stolen the necklace. Was the punishment of my offense severe enough when I heard those words? Surely I have asserted some claim to your pity at last? I only want more time. With a few months before me, with my salary as housekeeper, and the sale of my little valuables and the proceeds from my work for the picture, dealers I have, can and will replace the money. You are rich. What is the loan of 5,000 florins to you? Help me to pass through the terrible ordeal of your day of reckoning on the 6th of the month. Help me to see Minna married and happy. And if you still doubt my word, take the pearl necklace as security that you will suffer no loss." Struck speechless by the outrageous audacity of this proposal, Mrs. Wagner answered by a look, and advanced to the door. Madame Fontaine instantly stopped her. "Wait!" cried the desperate creature. "Think before you refuse me." Mrs. Wagner's indignation found its way at last into words. "I deserved this," she said, "when I allowed you to speak to me. Let me pass, if you please." Madame Fontaine made a last effort. She fell on her knees. "Your hard words have roused my pride," she said. "I have forgotten that I am a disgraced woman. I have not spoken humbly enough. See, I am humbled. Now I implore your mercy on my knees. This is not only my last chance, it is Minna's last chance. Don't blight my poor girl's life for my fault." "For the second time, Madame Fontaine, I request you to let me pass." "Without an answer to my entreaties? Am I not even worthy of an answer?" "Your entreaties are an insult. I forgive you the insult." Madame Fontaine rose to her feet. Every trace of agitation disappeared from her face and her manner. "Yes," she said, with the unnatural composure that was so strangely out of harmony with the terrible position in which she stood. "Yes, from your point of view I can't deny that it may seem like an insult, when a thief, who has already robbed a person of money, asks that same person to lend her more money, by way of atoning for the theft. There is something very audacious, on the surface, in such a request. I can't fairly expect you to understand the despair which wears such an insolent look. Accept my apologies, madam. I didn't see it at first in that light. I must do what I can, while your merciful silence still protects me from discovery. I must do what I can between this and the 6th of the month. Permit me to open the door for you." She opened the drawing-room door and waited. Mrs. Wagner's heart suddenly quickened its beat. Under what influence? Could it be fear? She was indignant with herself at the bare suspicion of it. Her face flushed deeply under the momentary apprehension that some outward change might betray her. She left the room without even trusting herself to look at the woman who stood by the open door, and bowed to her with an impenetrable assumption of respect as she passed out. Madame Fontaine remained in the drawing-room. She violently closed the door with a stroke of her hand, staggered across the room to a sofa, and dropped on it. A hoarse cry of rage and despair burst from her now that she was alone. In the fear that someone might hear her, she forced a handkerchief into her mouth and fastened her teeth into it. The paroxysm passed. She sat up on the sofa and wiped the perspiration from her face, and smiled to herself. "It was well I stopped here," she thought. "I might have met someone on the stairs." As she rose to leave the drawing room, Fritz's voice reached her from the far end of the corridor. "You are out of spirits, Minna. Come in and let us try what a little music will do for you." The door leading into the recess was opened. Minna's voice became audible next on the inner side of the curtains. "I'm afraid I can't sing to-day, Fritz. I am very unhappy about mamma. She looks so anxious and so ill, and when I ask what is troubling her, she puts me off with an excuse. The melody of those fresh young tones, the faithful love and sympathy which the few simple words expressed, seemed to wring with an unendurable pain the whole being of the mother who heard them. She lifted her hands above her head and clenched them in agony which could only venture to seek that silent means of relief. With swift steps, as if the sound of her daughter's voice was unendurable to her, she made for the door. But her movements, on ordinary occasions the perfection of easy grace, felt the disturbing influence of the agitation that possessed her. In avoiding a table on one side, as she passed it, she struck against a chair on the other. Fritz instantly opened the curtains and looked through. "Why, here is mamma!" he exclaimed in his hearty boyish way. Minna instantly closed the piano and hastened to her mother. When Madame Fontaine looked at her, she paused with an expression of alarm. "Oh, how dreadfully pale and ill you look!" She advanced again, and tried to throw her arms round her mother and kiss her. Gently, very gently, Madame Fontaine signed to her to draw back. "Mamma, what have I done to offend you?" "Nothing, my dear." "Then why won't you let me come to you?" "No time now, Minna. I have something to do. Wait till I have done it." "Not even one little kiss, mamma?" Madame Fontaine hurried out of the room without answering, and ran up the stairs without looking back. Minna's eyes filled with tears. Fritz stood at the open door, bewildered. "I wouldn't have believed it if anybody had told me," he said. "Your mother seems to be afraid to let you touch her." Fritz had made many mistaken guesses in his time, but, for once, he had guessed right. She was afraid. End of Chapter 11, Part 2. Recording by Sandra Estenson.
12 of Jezebel's Daughter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Diana Meilinger. Jezebel's Daughter by Wilkie Collins. Part 2, Chapter 12. As the presiding genius of the household, Madame Fontaine was always the first in the room when the table was laid for the early German dinner. A knife with a speck on the blade, a plate with a suspicion of dirt on it, never once succeeded in escaping her observation. If Joseph folded a napkin carelessly, Joseph not only heard of it, but suffered the indignity of seeing his work performed for him to perfection by the housekeeper's dexterous hands. On the second day of the new year, she was at her post as usual, and Joseph stood convicted of being wasteful with the matter of wine. He had put one bottle of Oglisberger on the table, at the place occupied by Madame Fontaine. The wine had already been used at the dinner and at the supper of the previous day. At least 2/3 of it had been drunk. Joseph set down a second bottle on the opposite side of the table, and produced his corkscrew. Madame Fontaine took it out of his hand. "Why do you open that bottle before you are sure it will be wanted?" she asked sharply. "You know that Mr. Keller and his son prefer beer." "There is so little left in the other bottle," Joseph pleaded. "Not a full tumbler altogether." "It may be enough, little as it is, for Mrs. Wagner and for me." With that reply she pointed to the door. Joseph retired, leaving her alone at the table, until the dinner was ready to be brought into the room. In 5 minutes more the family assembled at their meal. Joseph performed his customary duties sulkily, resenting the housekeeper's reproof. When the time came for filling the glasses, he had the satisfaction of hearing Madame Fontaine herself give him orders to draw the cork of a new bottle, after all. Mrs. Wagner turned to Jack, standing behind her chair as usual, and asked for some wine. Madame Fontaine instantly took up the nearly empty bottle by her side, and, half filling the glass, handed it with grave politeness across the table. "If you have no objection," she said, "we will finish one bottle before we open another." Mrs. Wagner drank her small portion of wine at a draught. "It doesn't seem to keep well, after it has once been opened," she remarked, as she set down her glass. "The wine has quite lost the good flavor it had yesterday." "It ought to keep well," said Mr. Keller, speaking from his place at the top of the table. "It's old wine, and good wine. Let me taste what is left." Joseph advanced to carry the remains of the wine to his master, but Madame Fontaine was beforehand with him. "Open the other bottle directly," she said, and rose so hurriedly to take the wine herself to Mr. Keller that she caught her foot in her dress. In saving herself from falling, she lost her hold of the bottle. It broke in 2 pieces, and the little wine left in it ran out on the floor. "Pray forgive me," she said, smiling faintly. "It is the first thing I have ever broken since I have been in the house." The wine from the new bottle was offered to Mrs. Wagner. She declined to take any, and she left her dinner unfinished on her plate. "My appetite is very easily spoiled," she said. "I dare say there might have been something I didn't notice in the glass, or perhaps my taste may be out of order." "Very likely," said Mr. Keller. "You didn't find anything wrong with the wine yesterday. And there is certainly nothing to complain of in the new bottle," he added, after tasting it. "Let us have your opinion, Madame Fontaine." He filled the housekeeper's glass. "I am a poor judge of wine," she remarked humbly. "It seems to me to be delicious." She put her glass down, and noticed that Jack's eyes were fixed on her with a solemn and scrutinizing attention. "Do you see anything remarkable in me?" she asked lightly. "I was thinking," Jack answered. "Thinking of what?" "This is the first time I ever saw you in danger of tumbling down. It used to be a remark of mine, at Würzburg, that you were as sure-footed as a cat. That's all." "Don't you know that there are exceptions to all rules?" said Madame Fontaine, as amiably as ever. "I notice an exception in you," she continued, suddenly changing the subject. "What has become of your letter bag? May I ask if you have taken away his keys, Mrs. Wagner?" She had noticed Jack's pride in his character as keeper of the keys. There would be no fear of his returning to the subject of what he had remarked at Würzburg if she had stung him in that tender place. The result did not fail to justify her anticipations. In fierce excitement, Jack jumped up on the hind rail of his mistress's chair, eager for the most commanding position that he could obtain, and opened his lips to tell the story of the night alarm. Before he could utter a word, Mrs. Wagner stopped him, with a very unusual irritability of look and manner. "The question was put to me," she said. "I am taking care of the keys, Madame Fontaine, at Jack's own request. He can have them back again whenever he chooses to ask for them." "Tell her about the thief," Jack whispered. "Be quiet!" Jack was silenced at last. He retired to a corner. When he followed Mrs. Wagner as usual, on her return to her duties in the office, he struck his favorite place in the window seat with his clenched fist. "The devil take Frankfurt!" he said. "What do you mean?" "I hate Frankfort! You were always kind to me in London. You do nothing but lose your temper with me here. It's really too cruel. Why shouldn't I have told Mrs. Housekeeper how I lost my keys in the night? Now I come to think of it, I believe she was the thief." "Hush! hush! You must not say that. Come and shake hands, Jack, and make it up. I do feel irritable. I don't know what's the matter with me. Remember, Mr. Keller doesn't like your joining in the talk at dinner time. He thinks it is taking a liberty." That was one reason why I stopped you. And you might have said something to offend Madame Fontaine. That was another. It will not be long before we go back to our dear old London. Now, be a good boy, and leave me to my work." Jack was not quite satisfied, but he was quiet again. For a while he sat watching Mrs. Wagner at her work. His thoughts went back to the subject of the keys. Other people, the younger clerks and the servants for example, might have observed that he was without his bag, and might have injuriously supposed that the keys had been taken away from him. Little by little he reached the conclusion that he had been in too great a hurry perhaps to give up the bag. Why not prove himself to be worthier of it than ever, by asking to have it back again, and taking care always to lock the door of his bedroom at night? He looked at Mrs. Wagner, to see if she paused over her work, so as to give him an opportunity of speaking to her. She was not at work; she was not pausing over it. Her head hung down over her breast; her hands and arms lay helpless on the desk. He got up and crossed the room on tiptoe, to look at her. She was not asleep. Slowly and silently she turned her head. Her eyes stared at him awfully. Her mouth was a little crooked. There was a horrid gray paleness all over her face. He dropped terrified on his knees, and clasped her dress in both hands. "Oh, mistress, mistress, you are ill! What can I do for you?" She tried to reassure him by a smile. Her mouth became more crooked still. "I am not well," she said, speaking thickly and slowly, with an effort. "Help me down. Bed, bed." He held out his hands. With another effort she lifted her arms from the desk, and turned to him on the high office stool. "Take hold of me," she said. "I have got hold of you, mistress. I have got your hands in my hands. Don't you feel it?" "Press me harder." He closed his hands on hers with all his strength. Did she feel it now? Yes, she could just feel it now. Leaning heavily upon him, she set her feet on the floor. She felt with them as if she was feeling the floor without quite understanding that she stood on it. The next moment she reeled against the desk. "Giddy," she said, faintly and thickly. "My head." Her eyes looked at him, cold and big and staring. They maddened the poor affectionate creature with terror. The frightful shrillness of the past days in Bedlam was in his voice, as he screamed for help. Mr. Keller rushed into the room from his office, followed by the clerks. "Fetch the doctor, one of you!" he cried. "Stop!" He mastered himself directly, and called to mind what he had heard of the two physicians who had attended him during his own illness. "Not the old man," he said. "Fetch Dr. Dormann. Joseph will show you where he lives." He turned to another of the clerks, supporting Mrs. Wagner in his arms while he spoke. "Ring the bell in the hall, the upstairs bell for Madame Fontaine." End of Chapter 12 of Part 2. Chapter 13 of Jezebel's Daughter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Diana Meilinger. Jezebel's Daughter by Wilkie Collins. Part 2, Chapter 13. Madame Fontaine instantly left her room. Alarmed by the violent ringing of the bell, Minna followed her mother downstairs. The door of the office was open. They both saw what had happened as soon as they reached the hall. In sending for Madame Fontaine, Mr. Keller had placed a natural reliance on the experience and presence of mind of a woman of her age and character. To his surprise, she seemed to be as little able to control herself as her daughter. He was obliged to summon the assistance of the elder of the female servants, in carrying Mrs. Wagner to her room. Jack went with them, holding one of his mistress's helpless hands. His first paroxysm of terror had passed away with the appearance of Mr. Keller and the clerk, and had left his weak mind stunned by the shock that had fallen on it. He looked about him vacantly. Once or twice, on the slow sad progress up the stairs, they heard him whispering to himself, "She won't die. No, 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 she won't die." His only consolation seemed to be in that helpless confession of faith. When they laid her on the bed, he was close at the side of the pillow. With an effort her eyes turned on him. With an effort she whispered, "The key!" She understood her. The desk downstairs had been left unlocked. "I'll take care of the key, mistress. I'll take care of them all," he said. As he left the room, he repeated his comforting words: "She won't die. No, 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 she won't die." He locked the desk, and placed the key with the rest in his bag. Leaving the office with the bag slung over his shoulder, he stopped at the door of the dining room, on the opposite side of the hall. His head felt strangely dull. A sudden suspicion that the feeling might show itself in his face made him change his mind and pause before he ascended the stairs. There was a looking-glass in the dinner-room. He went straight to the glass, and stood before it, studying the reflection of his face with breathless anxiety. "Do I look stupid mad?" he asked himself. "They won't let me be with her, they'll send me away if I look stupid mad." He turned from the glass, and dropped on his knees before the nearest chair. "Perhaps God will keep me quiet," he thought, "if I say my prayers." Repeating his few simple words, the poor creature's memory vaguely recalled to him the happy time when his good mistress had first taught him his prayers. The one best relief that could come to him came the relief of tears. Mr. Keller, descending to the hall in his impatience for the arrival of the doctor, found himself unexpectedly confronted by Mrs. Wagner's crazy attendant. "May I go upstairs to mistress?" Jack asked humbly. "I've said my prayers, sir, and I've had a good cry, and my head's easier now." Mr. Keller spoke to him more gently than usual. "You had better not disturb your mistress before the doctor comes." "May I wait outside her door, sir? I promise to be quiet." Mr. Keller consented by a sign. Jack took off his shoes, and noiselessly ascended the stairs. Before he reached the first landing, he turned and looked back into the hall. "Mind this," he announced very earnestly. "I say she won't die. I say that." He went on up the stairs. For the first time, Mr. Keller began to pity the harmless little man whom he had hitherto disliked. "Poor wretch!" he said to himself, as he paced up and down the hall. "What will become of him if she does die?" In 10 minutes more, Dr. Dormann arrived at the house. His face showed that he thought badly of the case, as soon as he looked at Mrs. Wagner. He examined her, and made all the necessary inquiries, with the unremitting attention to details which was part of his professional character. One of his questions could only be answered generally. Having declared his opinion that the malady was paralysis, and that some of the symptoms were far from being common in his medical experience, he inquired if Mrs. Wagner had suffered from any previous attack of disease. Mr. Keller could only reply that he had known her from the time of her marriage, and that he had never, in the course of a long and intimate correspondence with her husband, heard of her having suffered from serious illnesses of any kind. Dr. Dormann looked at his patient narrowly, and looked back again at Mr. Keller with unconcealed surprise. "At her age," he said, "I have never seen any first attack of paralysis so complicated and so serious as this. Is there danger?" Mr. Keller asked him in a whisper. "She is not an old woman," the doctor answered. "There is always hope. A practice in these cases generally is to bleed. In this case, the surface of the body is cold. Her heart's action is feeble. I don't like to try bleeding, if I can possibly avoid it." After some further consideration, he directed a system of treatment which, in some respects, anticipated the practice of a later and wiser time. Having looked at the women assembled around the bed, and especially at Madame Fontaine, he said he would provide a competent nurse, and would return to see the effect of the remedies in 2 hours. Looking at Madame Fontaine after the doctor had gone away, Mr. Keller felt more perplexed than ever. She presented the appearance of a woman who was completely unnerved. "I am afraid you are far from well yourself," he said. "I have not felt well, sir, for some time past," she answered, without looking at him. "You had better try what rest and quiet will do for you," he suggested. "Yes, I think so." With that reply, not even offering, for the sake of appearances, to attend on Mrs. Wagner until the nurse arrived, she took her daughter's arm and went out. The woman servant was fortunately a discreet person. She remembered the medical instructions, and she undertook all needful duties until the nurse relieved her. Jack, who had followed the doctor into the room, and had watched him attentively, was sent away again for the time. He would not go farther than the outer side of the door. Mr. Keller passed him, crouched up on the mat, biting his nails. He was apparently thinking of the doctor. He said to himself, "That man looked puzzled. That man knows nothing about it." In the meantime, Madame Fontaine reached her room. "Where is Fritz?" she asked, dropping her daughter's arm. "He has gone out, mamma. Don't send me away. You seem to be almost as ill as poor Mrs. Wagner. I want to be with you." Madame Fontaine hesitated. "Do you love me with all your heart and soul?" she asked suddenly. "Are you worthy of any sacrifice that a mother can make for her child?" Before the girl could answer, she spoke more strangely still. "Are you just as fond of Fritz as ever? Would it break your heart if you lost him?" Minna placed her mother's hands on her bosom. "Feel it, mamma," she said quietly. Madame Fontaine took her chair by the fireside, seating herself with her back to the light. She beckoned to her daughter to sit by her. After an interval, Minna ventured to break the silence. "I am very sorry for Mrs. Wagner, mamma. She has always been so kind to me. Do you think she will die?" Resting her elbows on her knees, staring into the fire, the widow lifted her head, looked around, and looked back again at the fire. "Ask the doctor," she said. "Don't ask me." There was another long interval of silence. Minna's eyes were fixed anxiously on her mother. Madame Fontaine remained immovable, still looking into the fire. Afraid of speaking again, Minna sought refuge from the oppressive stillness in a little act of attention. She took a fire screen from the chimney-piece, and tried to place it gently in her mother's hand. At that light touch, Madame Fontaine sprang to her feet, as if she had felt the point of a knife. Had she seen some frightful thing? Had she heard some dreadful sound? "I can't bear it!" she cried. "I can't bear it any longer!" "Are you in pain, mamma? Will you lie down on the bed?" Her mother only looked at her. She drew back trembling, and said no more. Madame Fontaine crossed the room to the wardrobe. When she spoke next, she was outwardly quite calm again. "I'm going out for a walk," she said. "A walk, mamma? It's getting dark already." "Dark or light, my nerves are all on edge. I must have air and exercise." "Let me go with you." She paced backwards and forwards restlessly, before she answered. "The room isn't half large enough," she burst out. "I feel suffocated in these four walls. Space! Space! I must have space to breathe in. Did you say you wished to go out with me? I want a companion, Minna. Don't you mind the cold? I don't even feel it in my fur cloak. Get ready, then, directly." In 10 minutes more, the mother and daughter were out of the house. End of Chapter 13 of Part 2.
Chapter 14 of Jezebel's Daughter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Herndon Bell. Jezebel's Daughter by Wilkie Collins. Part 2, Chapter 14. Dr. Dormann was punctual to his appointment. He was accompanied by a stranger whom he introduced as a surgeon. As before, Jack slipped into the room and waited in a corner, listening and watching attentively. Instead of improving under the administration of the remedies, the state of the patient had sensibly deteriorated. On the rare occasions when she attempted to speak, it was almost impossible to understand her. The sense of touch seemed to be completely lost. The poor woman could no longer feel the pressure of a friendly hand. And, more ominous still, a new symptom had appeared. It was with evident difficulty that she performed the act of swallowing. Doctor Dormann turned resignedly to the surgeon. "There is no other alternative," he said. "You must bleed her." At the sight of the lancet and the bandage, Jack started out of his corner. His teeth were fast set. His eyes glared with rage. Before he could approach the surgeon, Mr. Keller took him sternly by the arm, and pointed to the door. He shook himself free, He saw the point of the lancet touch the vein. As the blood followed the incision, a cry of horror burst from him. He ran out of the room. "Wretches! Tigers! How dare they take her blood from her? Oh, why am I only a little man? Why am I not strong enough to fling the brutes out of the window? Mistress, mistress, is there nothing I can do to help you?" These wild words poured from his lips in the solitude of his little bedchamber. In the agony that he suffered, as the sense of Mrs. Wagner's danger now forced itself on him, he rolled on the floor and struck himself with his clenched fists, and again he cried out to her, "Mistress, mistress, is there nothing I can do to help you?" The strap that secured his keys became loosened as his frantic movements beat the leather bag, now on one side and now on the other, upon the floor. The jingling of the keys rang in his ears. For a moment he lay quite still. Then he sat up on the floor. He tried to think calmly. There was no candle in the room. The nearest light came from a lamp on the landing below. He got up and went softly down the stairs. Alone on the landing, he held up the bag and looked at it. "There's something in my mind trying to speak to me," he said to himself. "Perhaps I shall find it here." He knelt under the light and took out the keys on the landing. One by one he ranged them in a row, with a single exception. The key of the desk happened to be the first that he took up. He kissed it. It was her key, and put it back in the bag. Placing the others before him, the duplicate key was the last in the line. The inscription caught his eye. He held it to the light and read, "Pink room cupboard." The lost recollection now came back to him in intelligible form. The remedy that Madame Fontaine had locked up, the precious remedy made by the wonderful master who knew everything, was at his disposal. He had only to open the cupboard and to have it in his own possession. He threw the other keys back into the bag. They rattled as he ran down the lower flight of stairs. Opposite to the offices, he stopped and buckled them tight with the strap. No noise, nothing to alarm Mrs. Housekeeper. He ascended the stairs in the other wing of the house, and paused again when he approached Madame Fontaine's room. By this time he was in the perilous fever of excitement which was still well remembered among the authorities of Bedlam. Suppose the widow happened to be in her room? Suppose she refused to let him have the remedy? He looked at the outstretched fingers of his right hand. "I am strong enough to throttle a woman," he said, "and I'll do it." He opened the door without knocking, without stopping to listen outside. Not a creature was in the room. In another moment the fatal dose of Alexander's wine, which he innocently believed to be a beneficent remedy, was in his possession. As he put it into the breast pocket of his coat, the wooden chest caught his eye. He reached it down and tried the lid. The lid opened in his hand, and disclosed the compartments and the bottles placed in them. One of the bottles rose higher by an inch or two than any of the others. He drew that one out first to look at it, and discovered the blue glass bottle. From that moment all idea of trying the effect on Mrs. Wagner of the treacherous remedy in his pocket vanished from his mind. He had secured the inestimable treasure, known to him by his own experience. Here was the heavenly bottle that had poured life down his throat when he lay dying at Würzburg. This was the true and only doctor who had saved Mr. Keller's life, when the poor helpless fools about his bed had given him up for lost. The mistress, the dear mistress, was as good as cured already. Not a drop more of her precious blood should be shed by the miscreant who had opened his knife and wounded her. Oh, of all the colors in the world, there's no color like blue. Of all the friends in the world, there was never such a good friend as this. He kissed and hugged the bottle as if it had been a living thing. He jumped up and danced about the room with it in his arms. Ha! What music there was in the inner gurgling and splashing of the shaken liquid, which told him that there was still some left for the mistress. The striking of the clock on the mantelpiece sobered him at the height of his ecstasy. It told him that time was passing. Minute by minute, death might be getting nearer and nearer to her, and there he was, with life in his possession, wasting the time far from her bedside. On his way to the door he stopped. His eyes turned slowly towards the inner part of the room. They rested on the open cupboard, and then they looked at the wooden chest left on the floor. Suppose the housekeeper should return, and see the key in the cupboard and the chest with one of the bottles missing? His only counselor at that critical moment was his cunning, stimulated into action by the closely related motive powers of his inbred vanity and his devotion to the benefactress whom he loved. The chance of being discovered by Madame Fontaine never entered into his calculations. He cared nothing whether she discovered him or not. He had got the bottle, and woe to her if she tried to take it away from him. What he really dreaded was that the housekeeper might deprive him of the glory of saving Mrs. Wagner's life, if she found out what had happened. She might follow him to the bedside. She might claim the blue glass bottle as her property. She might say, "I saved Mr. Keller, and now I have saved Mrs. Wagner. This little man is only the servant who gave the dose, which any other hand might have poured out in his place." Until these considerations occurred to him, his purpose had been to announce his wonderful discovery publicly at Mrs. Wagner's bedside. This intention he now abandoned without hesitation. He saw a far more inviting prospect before him. What a glorious position for him it would be if he watched his opportunity of administering the life-giving liquid privately, if he waited till everybody was astonished at the speedy recovery of the suffering woman, and then stood up before them all, and proclaimed himself as the man who had restored her to health. He replaced the chest and locked the cupboard, taking the key away with him. Returning to the door, he listened intently to make sure that nobody was outside, and kept the blue glass bottle hidden under his coat when he ventured at last to leave the room. He reached the other wing of the house, and ascended the second flight of stairs without interruption of any kind. Safe again in his own room, he watched through the half-opened door. Before long, Dr. Dormann and the surgeon appeared, followed by Mr. Keller. The three went downstairs together. On the way, the doctor mentioned that he had secured a nurse for the night. Still keeping the bottle concealed, Jack knocked softly at the door and entered Mrs. Wagner's room. He first looked at the bed. She lay still and helpless, noticing nothing. To all appearance, poor soul, a dying woman. The servant was engaged in warming something over the fire. She shook her head gloomily when Jack inquired if any favorable change had taken place in his absence. He sat down vainly trying to discover how he might find the safe opportunity of which he was in search. The slow minutes followed each other. After a little while, the woman servant looked at the clock. "It's time Mrs. Wagner had her medicine," she remarked, still occupied with her employment at the fire. Jack saw his opportunity in those words. "Please let me give the medicine," he said. "Bring it here," she answered. "I mustn't trust anybody to measure it out." "Surely I can give it to her now it's ready?" Jack persisted. The woman handed the glass to him. "I can't very well leave what I am about," she said. "Mind you are careful not to spill any of it. She's as patient as a lamb, poor creature. If she can only swallow it, she won't give you any trouble." Jack carried the glass round to the farther side of the bed, so as to keep the curtains as a screen between himself and the fireplace. He softly dropped out the contents of the glass on the carpet, and filled it again from the bottle concealed under his coat. Waiting a moment after that, he looked towards the door. What if the housekeeper came in and saw the blue glass bottle? He snatched it up, an empty bottle now, and put it in the side pocket of his coat, and arranged his handkerchief so as to hide the part of it which the pocket was not deep enough to conceal. "Now," he thought to himself, "now I may venture." He gently put his arm round Mrs. Wagner and raised her on the pillow. "Your medicine, dear mistress," he whispered. "You will take it from poor Jack, won't you?" A sense of hearing still remained. Her vacant eyes turned towards him by slow degrees. No outward expression answered to her thought. She could show him that she submitted, and she could do no more. He dashed away the tears that blinded him. Supported by the firm belief that he was saving her life, he took the glass from the bedside table and put it to her lips. With painful efforts, with many intervals of struggling breath, she swallowed the contents of the glass, by a few drops at a time. He held it up under the shadowed lamplight, and saw that it was empty. As he laid her head back on the pillow, he ventured to touch her cold cheek with his lips. "Has she taken it?" the woman asked. He was just able to answer, "Yes," just able to look once more at the dear face on the pillow. The tumult of contending emotions, against which he had struggled thus far, overpowered his utmost resistance. He ran to hide the hysterical passion in him, forcing its way to relief in sobs and cries, on the landing outside. In the calmer moments that followed, the fear still haunted him that Madame Fontaine might discover the empty compartment in the medicine chest, might search every room in the house for the lost bottle, and might find it empty. Even if he broke it and threw the fragments into the dust hole, the fragments might be remarked for their beautiful blue color, and the discovery might follow. Where could he hide it? While he was still trying to answer that question, the hours of business came to an end, and the clerks were leaving the offices below. He heard them talking about the hard frost as they went out. One of them said that there were blocks of ice floating down the river already. The river! It was within a few minutes' walk of the house. Why not throw the bottle into the river? He waited until there was perfect silence below, and then stole downstairs. As he opened the door, a strange man met him ascending the house steps, with a little traveling bag in his hand. "Is this Mr. Keller's?" asked the strange man. He was a jolly looking old fellow, with twinkling black eyes and a big red nose. His breath was redolent of the smell of wine, and his thick lips expanded into a broad grin when he looked at Jack. "My name's Schwartz," he said, "and here in this bag are my sister's things for the night." "Who is your sister?" Jack inquired. Schwartz laughed. "Quite right, little man. How would you know who she is? My sister's the nurse. She's hired by Dr. Dormann, and she'll be here in an hour's time. I say, that's a pretty bottle you're holding there under your coat. Is there any wine in it?" Jack began to tremble. He had been discovered by a stranger. Even the river might not be deep enough to keep his secret now. "The cold has gotten into my inside," proceeded the jolly old man. "Be a good little fellow and give us a drop." "I haven't got any wine in it," Jack answered. Schwartz laid his forefinger confidentially along the side of his big red nose. "I understand," he said. "You were just going out to get some." He put his sister's bag on one of the chairs in the hall, and took Jack's arm in the friendliest manner. "Suppose you come along with me," he suggested. "I am the man to help you to the best tap of wine in Frankfurt. Bless your heart, you needn't feel ashamed of being in my company. My sister's a most respectable woman. And what do you think I am? I'm one of the city officers. Just think of that! I'm not joking, mind. The regular night watchman at the dead house is ill in bed, and they're obliged to find somebody to take his place till he gets well again. I'm the somebody. They tried 2 other men, but the dead house gave them the horrors. My respectable sister spoke for me, you know. The regular watchman will be well in a week, she says. Try him for a week, and they tried me. I'm not proud, though I am a city officer. Come along and let me carry the bottle." The bottle again, and just as this intrusive person spoke of it, Joseph's voice was audible below, and Joseph's footsteps gave notice that he was ascending the kitchen stairs. In the utter bewilderment of the moment, Jack ran out, with the one idea of escaping the terrible possibilities of discovery in the hall. He heard the door closed behind him, then heavy boots thumping the pavement at a quick trot. Before he had got 20 yards from the house, the vinous breath of Schwartz puffed over his shoulder, and the arm of the deputy night watchman took possession of him again. "Not too fast. I'm nimble on my legs for a man of my age, but not too fast," said his new friend. "You're just the sort of little man I like. My sister will tell you I take sudden fancies to people of your complexion. My sister's a most respectable woman. What's your name?" "Jack." "A capital name. Short, but with a smack in it, like the crack of a whip. Do give me the bottle." He took it this time, without waiting to have it given to him. "There! Might drop it, you know," he said. "It's safe in my friendly hands. Where are you going to? You don't deal, I hope, at the public house up that way? A word in your ear. The infernal scoundrel waters his wine. Here's the turning where the honest publican lives. I have the truest affection for him. I have the truest affection for you. Would you like to see the dead house some night? It's against the rules, but that don't matter. The cemetery overseer is a deal too fond of his bed to turn out these cold nights and look after the watchman. It's just the right place for me. There's nothing to do but to drink when you've got the liquor, and to sleep when you haven't. The dead who come our way, my little friend, have one great merit. We're supposed to help them if they're perverse enough to come to life again before they're buried. There they lie in our house, with one end of the line tied to their fingers, and the other end at the spring of the alarm bell. And they have never rung the bell yet, never once, bless their hearts, since the dead house was built. Come and see me in the course of the week, and we'll drink a health to our quiet neighbors." They arrived at the door of the public house. "You've got some money about you, I suppose?" said Schwartz. Madame Fontaine's generosity, when she gave Jack the money to buy a pair of gloves, had left a small surplus in his pocket. He made a last effort to escape from the deputy watchman. "There's the money," he said. "Give me back the bottle, and go and drink by yourself." Schwartz took him by the shoulder, and surveyed him from head to foot by the light of the public-house lamp. "Drink by myself?" he repeated. "Am I a jolly fellow, or am I not? Yes or no?" "Yes," said Jack, trying hard to release himself. Schwartz tightened his hold. "Did you ever hear of a jolly fellow who left his friend at the public-house door?" he asked. "If you please, sir, I don't drink," Jack pleaded. Schwartz burst into a great roar of laughter, and kicked open the door of the public-house. "That's the best joke I ever heard in my life," he said. "We've got money enough to fill the bottle, and have a glass apiece besides. Come along." He dragged Jack into the house. The bottle was filled, the glasses were filled. "My sister's health! Long life and prosperity to my respectable sister! You can't refuse to drink the toast." With those words he put the fatal glass into his companion's hand. Jack tasted the wine. It was cool. It was good. Perhaps it was not so strong as Mr. Keller's wine. He tried it again, and emptied the glass. An hour later there was a ring at the door of Mr. Keller's house. Joseph opened the door, and discovered a red-nosed old man holding up another man who seemed to be 3 parts asleep, and who was quite unable to stand on his legs without assistance. The light of the hall lamp fell on this helpless creature's face, and revealed Jack. "Put him to bed," said the red-nosed stranger. "And look here, take charge of the bottle for him, or he'll break it. Somehow the wine is all leaked out. Where's my sister's bag?" "Do you mean the nurse?" "Of course I do. I defy the world to produce the nurse's equal. Has she come?" Joseph held up his hand with a gesture of grave reproof. "Not so loud," he said. "The nurse has come too late." Has the lady got well again?" "The lady is dead." Chapter 14. Part 2.